I'm going to re-record this because evidently the last time it was a little quiet. So okay, so today here. Let me see that. Yeah. Okay, so today we're going to talk about philosophy, and this is an intro to philosophy class. So we're going to go over a little bit about the early. We're going to do it from a historical perspective. Some of the early perspectives on philosophy. And so today we're not going to introduce ourselves. We're doing that in the discussion board. We're not going to go over the syllabus. The syllabus is on Brightspace. You're good with that. I'm going to introduce you to philosophy. Go over some of the earliest debates in philosophy. So, what is philosophy? Well, philosophy and pre-Socratic philosophers. Philosophy comes from the Greek word, two words, philos, which means love. It's a type of love, actually, and Sophia, which is wisdom. So, unlike mythology, which is a term which refers to telling a story or some narrative, we're trying to understand what is true and wisdom in reference to truth. So, unlike mythology, where you have Homer and Hesiod stories of gods explaining the world through personal whims, and as many of you have seen the Odyssey, some of you may have, Homer is one of these, philosophy seeks rational, natural explanations using reason and observation. So what you have is the earliest Greek individuals that were interested in understanding what the nature of the world was, what the nature of reality was. And the earliest ones were these poets, and these poets were retelling stories that they had received. They had received these poems, and these poems were telling the story of the world in a narrative form. And this was in a narrative form, unlike in a explanatory form or an analytic form. This was purely in the form of a narrative. But philosophy seeks a different path. It seeks rational, natural explanations. Natural being you can observe processes, patterns, and you observe these patterns, and based on these patterns, you can infer what is true about it. And you use reason and observation. Reasons, what's in your head. Observations, not just your eyeballs, but your ears and everything that you sense and perceive. We won't go deep into areas of perception that are outside of the senses, but for this, we'll just talk about observation. For questions, what's the nature of reality, how we know what we know, and what is the good life? So for philosophy, we're trying to understand the nature of reality. What is real? We're trying to also understand how we know what we know. So that's called epistemology. It's not only what's real, but how do we know it? How is the brain able to develop an understanding of what's real? And what's the good life? That's ethics. What's the right thing to do? So these are all within the realm of philosophy. Core questions, so we talked about, and then we have metaphysics, which is the study of ultimate reality, epistemology, the study of knowledge, ethics, the study of right and wrong, logic is the study of valid reasoning, how you get to these conclusions about reality using premises. We won't go into over logic right now, but I think you understand it's valid reasoning. And aesthetics, which is the study of beauty, the study of order. It's not just what's attractive to you, but there's a reason it's attractive, because it's orderly, it's structured, it has a certain teleos to it, is a Greek word, which means a structure, a purpose. So the pre-Socratic philosophy marks the beginning of Western philosophy. Mythic to theoretic consciousness, explaining the world through impersonal principles rather than God. So again, harping back to that theme of the poets trying to understand the world through stories and through narratives about the gods, or the philosophers were trying to understand the world through how nature presents itself in systems, in patterns, in observed patterns, as well as things you can think about, what's logically and rationally defensible. So, and there's going to be some tension between what you observe and what you think, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. So just think about that for a minute, what you think and what you observe. How does philosophy differ from mythology? Yeah, we just talked about that. All right. So the first were the Malaysians. The Malaysians were called this in philosophy because the first major group of thinkers, which include Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, they originated from the ancient Greek city of Miletus in Ionia, which is modern-day Turkey, which used to be called Asia Minor. They are considered the founders of Western philosophy and science, known for moving from mythological to rational explanations. So they're kind of tired of hearing about the poets saying, yes, this is true because so-and-so said so. No, this is not true because the gods were in a fight and, their backs hit the landscape and pushed up a mountain. Rather, these phenomena are there because of certain processes and certain patterns that they observe in nature. And that's what the Malaysians were really interested in exploring. So we have, where's Thales? I have Thales here. Well, first Thales was, he believed that the ultimate nature of the world was water. Because at this time, the Greeks believed that there were four essences that made up everything. These were foundational. These were fundamental essences or substances. And there was earth, air, fire, and water. So the Thales, everything was ultimately water. And water can be solid, liquid, or vapor. It is essential for life. Magnets have souls because they move. This was early animism. And this was first predicted in eclipse rationally. So because of the properties of water and some of the aspects of water that he observed, he found many ways of predicting and coming to understand certain processes in nature, including the eclipses. Anaximander, however, felt that the arc, the arc being kind of the basis of, or the foundation of one of these substances, what was the main basic quintessence of all of these? The arc is the apeiron, which is the boundless, indefinite, an eternal, unlimited source from which opposites emerge and return. So for Anaximander, he felt that this apeiron was this source that we couldn't observe, but it was the basis for which all observable reality emerged out of. And he felt that it was based on opposites. You had light, dark, right? You had cold, dry. Wet, dry. You had hot, cold. So all of these opposites were emerging out of this apeiron, and they were kind of branching off and creating all of the world. Now, Anaximenes, he felt the arc was air, the basis, the quintessence, the one principal substance out of which all substances arise. He felt that it makes fire. Air makes fire by thinning. Condensation makes wind, cloud, water, earth. Quantitative change explains qualitative differences. So by observing and by identifying how much of a substance there was, you take like a cup, you've done recipes before, you put a teaspoon of this, 2 tablespoons of this, a cup of this. All of these are quantitative amounts of that substance, and those account for the qualitative differences. So that was the Milesians, and this was their perspective. Right? And you can kind of think about some of the questions. Why did Thales choose water? Compare Anaximander's apeiron to Thales's water, and how the Milesians' ideas shift from mythic to rational thinking. If you want to explore those ideas, that'd be great. We can talk about those some other time. Next were the Pythagoreans. So these were the other pre-Socratic. And when I say pre-Socratic, what I mean here are philosophers prior to Socrates. So the Socrates kind of marks the beginning of the tradition of philosophy. But prior to that, we had philosophers who were trying to understand reality in their own way. And one group was the Pythagoreans. And their follower, hence was the name, they were Pythagoras. And his followers. Reality is fundamentally mathematical numbers, and harmony govern the universe. Very similar to maybe some physicists who find that the beginnings of the universe from a singularity. Prior to that were actually these abstract, invisible, non-spatial, non-temporal formulas, right, that existed, and that they would kind of emanate down into what we have now. So that was one way of looking at reality. They felt that the fundamental nature of reality was a number. He discovered mathematical theorems. Pythagoras, of course, discovered the Pythagorean theorem. If you've taken geometry, I'm sure you're familiar with this. And he believed in the transmigration of souls, which is ultimately reincarnation. And he believed that the soul was this aspect of ourselves which transcended the physical, transcended that emanated. Emanation is just the idea that it's kind of like rain. You have these clouds, and then out of the clouds, condensation comes and it emanates down. And that's the same way with numbers. Numbers become pregnant. They become thick. They become dense. And once they become dense enough, they actually become physicality. They create the rules and the laws of physics. And Pythagoreans believe this, and even some modern day physicists might, kind of court this idea. Obviously, they wouldn't, say it dogmatically. And they lived ascetically. That's just a fancy way of saying that they avoided any pleasures and physical or sensual enjoyments of life. They were more contemplative. They thought about things. Okay, let's go. Heraclitus and the problem of change. So the third one, Socrates, from this perspective, was Heraclitus. So instead of substance being one thing that never changes, Heraclitus blew everyone's mind, says, actually, the basis of reality is change. The term change actually refers to a principle, a really existing source from which all reality comes. It's change itself. You can't see it, but you can see the effects that it has on the world. Just like you can't see, maybe if you're an invisible person walking on the beach, you can't see them, but you can see their footprints. And likewise, change gives its footprints through the changes, or the fact that everything is in flux that it makes. So everything is in flux, constant change. Reason and order governs change. So the fact that everything kind of has a pattern, a recognizable pattern in nature, that is the way that change is shaped. It's not just random. It has a teleos. It has a purpose, a design. And this governs change. And then you have fire as the arc, which is transformative. So he felt that fire was the foundational substance, because fire is change. So if you want a tangible or observational source of change, fire is literally found in fire. And then unity of opposites, strife, and harmony are the same. So he felt that if you have hatred towards someone or you have love, it's the same thing. It's a sort of yin-yang type of thing. Very interesting stuff. So which do you agree with? What kind of talk about yourself? Well, if you want, you can email me or you can talk in our discussion board, and we can start a discussion board this week, and you guys can talk about this. Which of these four essences do you feel is the most likely to be the source of all reality, if you were one of these individuals? Which one do you agree with? Do you like the Milesians, that these four essences? You like Pythagoras, the reality is number? Or you like Heraclitus, reality is nothing but change? Although you can almost put him in the Milesian category, because he did believe that fire was the ultimate essence, right? All right, let's move on to another group of pre-Socratic philosophers that contributed to philosophy up until Socrates. So you have the Eleatics, the pluralists, and the atomists. And they were interested in three things: plenitude, which is the fullness of reality. Everything is static, unchanging, full. You don't need anything else. Pluralism, you have a bunch of things that neither of them are fundamental. Unlike the Milesians, you don't have one source of all of these other phenomena or entities, but they're all kind of one in and of themselves. And then materialism, the idea that matter is the basis of reality. Okay, so the Eleatics, and we got Parmenides and Zeno. So the Eleatics were a group of philosophers around the 5th century BCE that were promoting the view that all of reality is plenitude. It's full, and thus being itself is unchanging, immutable, singular, and eternal. And these were its properties. In other words, think of it like a ball, a shiny ball. All of the matter that makes up the ball is homogeneous. That means it's all the same. There's no change. There's no variation. It's unchanging. It's immutable. We can't change it. It's too hard. You can't push it down and imprint your finger, your palm into it or change the shape. It is what it is. It's saying there's only one. There's not a bunch of them. And it exists forever. It's never not existed, and it never will not exist. It always is, and always will be. And this was the view of Parmenides. He believed that reality was this. It's ungenerated, it's eternal. And you can look at all these in our documents on Brightspace. I included all of these notes right here. So, and this explains kind of their view, particularly Parmenides. And then we got, so they went from mythology. Okay, so this was the progression. So we went from mythology, we were talking about narrative explains or undergirds reality. Reality is based on narratives, based on a story. It's the story of the gods. Well, you go from that to natural observation. Like, no, that's not enough. Right? Story is not enough. That's not something I can rely on. I can't rely on natural observation. I observe nature, and nature is the whole of all these patterns that I observe in reality. But Parmenides was like, wait. I observe things that don't make sense. You put the ore in water and it bends. It looks like it's bent. There are things in reality that don't make sense. I see a tree, and I see another tree. Why am I calling them both tree if there's not one of them? There's several of them. So what Parmenides found is that this oneness and the many things that are expressed by the one, like tree and tree, that means there must be this tree-ness. Parmenides is like, no. There's only one thing. It's nameless. I mean, you can't even call it, just being. It's being. It is what it is. And that trumps natural observation. I might see a lot of things. I see many things, but I'm only thinking one thing. So reason for Parmenides trumps all of that. Trumps natural observation and mythology. Mythology is no better than telling me what the nature of reality is than my observations, than my scientific analyses, because it's always changing. And change is not something that I can understand or make sense. So nature presents itself. Okay, we got all that. And you can read all this. Okay, so Zeno was Parmenides' disciple. He was a follower. He was a student of Parmenides. Zeno defended his instructor's belief in monism, the idea that the only one single entity exists that makes up all of reality. He rejected the existence of space, time, and motion. And he was so confident that he would try to prove it to other people. And here are some of the examples of some of the, and this is how we knew about it. Plato, Aristotle talked about it. Diogenes Laertius, I can't pronounce it. Anyways, he wrote a wonderful kind of a dictionary of ancient philosophers. Very good chance. I have one of his works really good. And Simplicius of Cilicia. But anyways, so he would try to demonstrate this, and some of these philosophers talked about this through examples. And here's some of the examples he included, but I think the best one to understand it is simply, the distance between myself and this projector, or this screen, I should say, is a certain amount of feet. Let's say 2 feet. Well, 2 feet can be divided into 1 feet, so you can halve that. Well, that distance between myself and the half can itself be halved to be 6 inches. That 6 inches, which is the halved of the halved, can be halved itself into 3 inches, and so forth. You can go through that deconstructive process, or that cutting or splicing of distance forever, infinitely. Now, that means that there's an infinite number of points of measurement between myself and the screen. Infinite number. Since there's an infinite number, he said it is impossible to traverse or move through an infinite number of points. Therefore, motion is impossible. I'm kind of chew on that for a minute. I'm not suggesting that's true. I'm just saying that is a really interesting paradox that Zeno had presented to his interlocutors that kind of gave them pause. Right now, there are some people who push back on it. We're going to find out about them right now. His paradoxes. So let's go over them right now. So the pluralists push back on it. They're like, no, that's ridiculous. There has to be motion. We see it. We observe it. If all of reality is an illusion, well, maybe my mind's an illusion. So we can't go that route. So the pluralists were like, no, we have to look at it in another way. So their response to the Elatics were, you saw two types, so pluralists and atomists, but we'll go over the pluralists first. The first one's Empedocles, about 434 BCE. He was heavily influential on Aristotle, by the way. So if you read Aristotle, I guarantee you're going to read a little bit about Empedocles because he was very influential. So he said there are multiple elements. You don't have to assume that there's just one. The multiplicity of elements, of phenomena, right, that things come from, that's fine that they can exist independently of each other, and they can exist, presumably forever. So, why is that a problem? So Empedocles was asking, why is it a problem? You have to condense everything into one. They can be what fancy words, equiprimordial. What that means is that they don't come from anything else. They're just there. They're there, and one is not the result of the other. One does not cause the other. They are just there, and they are interacting with each other. And that interaction is what we see in reality. Here's kind of a table that he would show. Love and strife, chaos and strife and love and harmony, and it's just a cycle of how, like, hatred or chaos and love were kind of intermingled with each other. And again, he was very influential to Aristotle. But ultimately, remember, with the pluralists, particularly with Empedocles, what he emphasized was the idea that you had a multiplicity in reality, and that multiplicity didn't have to be condensed to one thing, because it is possible that there are many things that one thing is not the source of. They're all just there. They didn't come from anything else. They're just there in reality. We can observe them. Okay, so Anaxagoras, he's a pluralist as well. Kind of like Empedocles, 500 to 428 BCE. Born in Clazmenais at a time when Asia Minor was under the control of the Persian Empire. Ooh, and if you guys remember that movie 300, that is when the Persians were attacking, and of course the Greeks, and had taken over much of the real estate of the Greek city-states, and they, but they've still had Greek or Hellenistic culture. So later in life, he was charged with impiety and went to exile in Lampascus. So some people in the Persian elite didn't like what he was saying. But Anaxagoras' pluralism holds that reality consists of infinitely many eternal seeds. Spermata. So this right here is sigma pi. My Greek is really terrible right now. Rho, mu. But anyways, that says spermata, which is seed. Each containing portions of every qualitative property, so that nothing comes to be from nothing or perishes into nothing, in keeping with Parmenides' prohibition of generation and destruction. So it's not created, but it's in there pregnant. It's ready to come out. It's potential. So what he was saying is that Parmenides was saying that all of the stuff had to be there, already cooked. Like, you bake a cake, it's already cooked. It's been always there. Well, he's saying, no, it wasn't there. You had all these ingredients put together, but it hadn't been baked yet. So like that, the seeds are the potentiality of all of these things that Parmenides, all these features that Parmenides was complaining about that existed, or that we observed that he felt that couldn't exist. So what we call change is merely the rearrangement and predominance of certain seeds within mixtures, not the creation of new being. So what Anaxagoras is suggesting in response to Parmenides is that new being isn't being created. It's just the potentiality is being actualized. And this as well was very influential to Aristotle and his views on actuality and potentiality, which is kind of his cosmology and of metaphysics. While the nous, which is the mind, a separate, unmixed ordering principle, initiates motion and organizes the cosmos. So you have all this potentiality. You have this nous or mind, which is organizing. Some people could see it as God. This is impersonal. He's not talking about a personal God, but ultimately a basis for rationale in the world, in reality. So you can't see it, but it has a quasi-mind. Not like our mind, but similar in the sense that it's making things go in a specific direction. It's structuring things in a particular way. It's just not, well, whether it's having conscious experience, that's another issue. But the nous is ultimately an organizational sort of principle that organizes the world, but it's abstract. You can't see it. Okay. Then we have the atomists, Leucippus and Democritus. So the atomists, I'm sure you can imagine, were big on the idea of atomic theory. They believed everything was made up of atoms. The oneness of being is not therefore some abstract beings, but rather a tangible material thing, atoms. They believed atoms were these like shiny little balls, and these balls kind of in proportion made up various different qualities. So if you had so many balls, like if you ever paint by numbers or what's that? Where you just put dots, like a dot matrix printer. All these dots in a particular coordination can make an image. Well, that's what they're saying. These atoms in particular proportions, in particular organizations, will create qualities, which would include sound, which would include color, which will include shape, and all of these things. So the atomists believe that's all there is. It's just these atoms, these small, tiny little particles that are indestructible. You can't slice them. Which is funny because we still use the term atom, even though we know that atoms can be broken apart because they're made up of even more fundamental parts, and these fundamental parts are made up of things we can't even explain, quantum spaces and all that stuff. But we won't go. Ultimately, they didn't believe that atoms were like what we in the modern world and our scientific understanding of these particles are. They didn't believe that you could break them up. They were indestructible. So a little different than the atoms that we talk about in science today. Well, we could watch a brief critique of it, but I won't do that. Richard Feynman. So if you get a chance, watch this video. It's in the, it's in our, it's embedded in the lecture notes. If you can't bring it up, just let me know and I'll post it, a direct link to it. But Richard Feynman, American theoretical physicist. He's best known for his work in the path integral formulation of quantum mechanics and the theory of quantum electrodynamics. And Feynman, so he's arguing against this atomistic materialism because he's suggesting that the way atoms actually work, as we've observed them, rather than the way they theorized about them 2,500 years ago, is much different. So, an atomic structure like this hand and this atomic structure hand never actually touch. Right? We think that these collection of balls hit this collection of balls, but that's not actually what happened. There are forces. So they never actually ever touch anything. So you could actually use that as an excuse if you're ever, accused of hurting someone, or, what you can just say, I never touched them, Judge. And you could be right, because you technically never touched them because of the forces repel, other forces. And technically, these are never really touching. But it's interesting. But this is in contrast to the atomists who believe that that's all there is. It's contiguity is the term, where this touches that. And in atomic theory, that's not actually what happens. Not what happens at all. All right, so that's all I have for you for this week. and we'll talk a little next week about some other philosophers and some other principles in philosophy. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and we'll discuss it. And if you guys are ever interested in, this semester having a few kind of breakdown sessions where we talk via Zoom or Google Meet, that would be great. That way we can kind of discuss these quasi in person, I guess, via Zoom or Google Meet or whatever. But I will see you guys next week. Have a good one.